It was the second week of November, and the world had that crisp, chilled feeling as autumn settled deeper into winter. I was driving back from my parents' house late in the evening, the sky a curtain of impenetrable black, with only my car's high beams cutting through the country road. The world seemed empty except for the occasional skeletal branches reaching out toward the road, their shadows crawling across my windshield. It felt too quiet. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, a momentary distraction from the blanket of darkness outside. I reached over, a quick glance telling me it was a message from my best friend, Kat. "Hey, did you make it home yet? Roads get dangerous this time of year." I started to type back, but as I looked up, my heart leapt into my throat. A pale figure stood in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car lurching to a stop. My headlights illuminated a woman. She stood stock still, wearing a thin, white nightgown. Her feet were bare, and her hair hung in the tangled, dark waves over her face. For a moment, neither of us moved. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel with my white-knuckled fingers, watching as she tilted her head slightly. I rolled my window down just enough to speak. "Ma'am, are you okay?" My voice was thin, uncertain, barely louder than a whisper. She didn't answer. She didn't move. I felt a pulse of panic. What was she doing out here in the middle of nowhere, wearing so little in this freezing weather? I considered calling for help, but before I could reach my phone again, she did move. She took one shuffling step toward my car, then another, her movements strange and jerky. A chill rippled down my spine. I wanted to leave, but a part of me thought maybe she was hurt, that maybe she needed help. My fingers trembled as I decided to try to dial. My fingers trembled as I tried to decide. Her face turned slowly toward me, and I finally saw her eyes. They were wide and glassy, unblinking, almost too big for her gaunt face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. I couldn't take it anymore. I shifted into reverse, the tires spinning on the cold, damp pavement. The woman jerked forward, breaking into a sudden, stumbling run toward my car. I was in panic as my hands fumbling with the gear shift, the car lurching as I finally merged to accelerate backward. She pounded on the hood of my car, her hands leaving smudges on the glass, her mouth twisted into a scream that still made no sound. Heart racing, I hit the brakes and shifted into drive, skidding around her. As I sped away, I looked in the rearview mirror. She stood there, standing still, in the middle of the road. I drove as fast as I could, not caring about speed limits or the risk of black ice. The image of her face, those eyes, were seared into mine. By the time I reached my driveway, I was breathing hard, the adrenaline still coursing through me. My house was dark, the porch light casting a faint glow. I ran inside, locked the door behind me. I grabbed my phone and dialed Kat, desperate for a human voice to ground me. "Hey, you alright? You sound... Kat. There was this woman. On the road. I don't know what she was doing out there." "Where exactly did you see her?" "Near Old Mill Road," I said, hugging myself to stop from shivering. Kat took a sharp breath. "Listen, I wasn't sure if I should say anything earlier, but last year, around this time, there was a woman who went missing. People said they'd seen her walking around the road at night, just like you described, but they never found her. And they still say she roams the roads, looking for someone to bring her home." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, those wide, unblinking eyes staring into mine. And even now, weeks later, when I drive the road, I find myself looking for her, half terrified, half certain she'll be there, waiting. It was a cold, rainy evening in early November when the email arrived. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the dull hum of the kettle the only sound in the small, dimly lit room. The subject line was in all caps. "Do you remember?" I hesitated before clicking on it. My finger hovered over the touchpad, a sense of unease crawling up my spine. I hadn't given my email out to anyone I didn't know, so this made no sense. The message was short and chilling. "We saw you. You thought no one knew, but we did. Look outside your window." My heart skipped a beat. I could feel the color drain from my face. The words made no sense, but the command at the end was enough to send a rush of cold fear through me. I didn't want to look outside. The rain was coming down in heavy sheets, and the thought of someone just standing out there in the darkness made my skin crawl. I swallowed hard and crept toward the living room window, pulling the curtains back just an inch. The streetlights barely cut through the heavy rain, and the neighborhood looked empty. I waited, my breath fogging up the glass, but nothing moved. I tried to convince myself it was all a prank, maybe a scam email. But even then, it felt too personal. Just as I was about to let the curtain fall, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I jumped, nearly dropping it as I grabbed to see the notification. Another email from the same sender. "Don't ignore me." The message had an attachment. I clicked on it before I could think better of it, and my stomach twisted. It was a grainy photograph taken from the outside of my house, and in the picture, I was sitting right where I had been just moments ago, at my kitchen table. I could even see the steam from the kettle. My mind raced. Whoever had sent this was close. Very close. Panicking, I called 911. My voice shook as I explained the situation. The dispatcher staying calm as she promised to send someone over. "Don't open the door for anyone until the police arrive. Stay inside and keep the lights on." I did as she said, flipping every light in the house on and double-checking the locks on the windows and doors. The next few minutes felt like hours, and I flinched at every creak the house made, every shadow that seemed to shift. Finally, I saw red and blue flashing lights through the rain-streaked windows. I ran to the front door and opened it just a crack, peering out at the uniformed officer standing on my porch. His name badge said, Reed, and he had a warm but serious expression. "We got your call. Mind if we come in?" I let the officer and his partner inside my house, a shorter woman named Officer Blake. They asked me about the emails, and I showed them everything on my laptop. Reed frowned as he examined the photo attachment. "It's definitely recent. You sure you haven't noticed anyone suspicious hanging around?" I shook my head. "No, it's been quiet all night." Blake nodded. "We'll check around the property. Lock the door behind us, okay?" I watched them step back into the storm, my fingers trembling as I did as they asked. A few more minutes passed. I paced the kitchen, staring at the clock and waiting for them to return. But then my laptop dinged with another email. This one simply said, "Nice try." I couldn't breathe. Before I could even think to call the police back, someone pounded on the front door. I nearly screamed, but it was Officer Reed, drenched and looking uneasy. "We found footprints leading away from your house into the woods." They're fresh, but whoever it was, they're gone now. I tried to tell him about the new email, but he put a hand on my shoulder. We'll keep an eye on your property tonight, and our tech team will look into where those emails came from. The officers stayed parked outside in their cruiser for hours, their lights sweeping across the rain-soaked street. I sat on my couch, staring at my laptop, waiting for another message, but nothing came. In the days that followed, the police traced the emails to a server used by anonymous accounts. They couldn't find who the sender was, but they'd been looking outside my house that night and never found another sign. I never felt safe in my own home again, and every November, when the rain falls heavy and cold, I swear I still hear footsteps outside, and I find myself dreading the next chilling message that might arrive, asking if I still remember. It was a quiet, late November evening, and the first real snow of the season had started to fall. The flakes drifted down lazily, blanketing the sidewalks and muffling the usual nighttime sounds. I had always loved walking in the snow, the way everything felt softer and more peaceful, so I decided to take a short walk around the neighborhood to clear my head before bed. I slipped on my heavy coat, hat, and gloves, and stepped out into the freezing night. The street was lined with old houses, their porches covering in a dusting of snow. Warm lights glowed from a few windows, but the neighborhood was mostly still. My boots crunched rhythmically against the icy ground as I turned down a quieter street lined with tall, skeletal trees. My breath came out in thick clouds, and for a while, I let myself enjoy the solitude, the beauty of the falling snow. But then I noticed something. About a block ahead, standing near the corner where the two streets intersected, was a dark figure. At first, I thought it might be just a neighbor, someone bundled up just like me out for a late-night walk. But they stood there motionless, facing my direction, not moving even as the snow accumulated on their shoulders. A prickle of unease crept up my neck. There was something unnatural about how still they were, like a statue. I stopped walking, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. The air suddenly felt colder, the snow less peaceful, and a deep sense of dread settled in my chest. My instincts told me to turn around and walk back the way I had come, but something about the figure held me there, rooted in place. I took a step backward, and the figure took a step forward. My heart thudded against my ribs. It wasn't the casual movement of someone out for a stroll. It was deliberate, almost predatory. I took another step back, and once again, the figure mirrored me, closing the distance. I turned on my heel and started walking quickly in the opposite direction. My boots crunched louder against the snow, and I could hear my pulse in my ears. I dared to glance back, hoping to see the figure retreating or gone altogether. But instead, I saw them moving. They had picked up speed, now striding purposefully in my direction. I broke out into a full-out run. The snow made the sidewalk slick, and I struggled to keep my balance. I had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. My street wasn't far away, but in that moment, it felt like miles. I ran faster, desperate to put as much distance between me and whatever that figure was behind me. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps, crunching faster through the snow. They were following me. I didn't dare turn around again. I focused on the porch lights of my house coming into view, a beacon of safety in the dark. I stumbled up the steps, my hands trembling as I fumbled for my keys. I jammed one into the lock, twisted it, and practically fell through the front door, slamming it shut behind me. I locked the deadbolt and pressed my back against the door, gasping for air. The house was silent except for the pounding of my heartbeat. I waited, straining to hear any sound outside, footsteps, breathing, anything. But there was nothing, just the soft, steady hiss of the snow falling on the world outside. I slowly crept to the window beside the door and peeled back the curtain an inch. The street was empty, snowflakes swirled in the lamplight, and there was no sign of the figure. But the dread hadn't faded. It had burrowed deep into my chest, an uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. I called the police, feeling ridiculous as I explained that someone had been following me, that they had acted threateningly. An officer arrived not long after, and he searched the neighborhood but found no one. Only my tracks and another set of footprints were visible, trailing off into the darkness. Probably just someone trying to scare you, the officer said, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. I wasn't either. For days after, every time I looked outside, I half expected to see that figure again, standing in the distance, watching and waiting. And on cold November nights, when the snow falls just right, I still remember the fear that gripped me, the sense that I was being hunted in the silence of the night.